Later that year, during the Battle of Bulcourt, Jacka's battalion. In a world torn apart by trenches and terror, where mud swallowed men whole and bullets wrote history with blood, one name rose from the smoke and fury: Albert Jacka. This is not just a war story. This is the saga of a man who became a legend, defying death with a rifle in his hands and steel in his soul. Welcome back to Lore of the Multiverse, where we unravel the most unbelievable true stories from every corner of reality. If you're drawn to tales of raw courage and survival against impossible odds, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and join the tribe. Because what you're about to hear is the kind of story that carves names into eternity. Albert Jacka was born on January 10, 1893, in a small town in Victoria, Australia. He was a quiet kid, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but when he stepped into the First World War, everything changed. By the time it was over, his name would be etched into the very soul of Australia. His bravery wasn't flashy, it was ferocious. He didn't look for glory. He just wouldn't let the men beside him die. When the war broke out in 1914, Jacka didn't hesitate. He enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force and was assigned to the 14th Battalion. He was 21 years old. A tradesman by background, but soon he would trade a carpenter's tools for a bayonet and become one of the most feared and revered soldiers in the trenches of Europe and the cliffs of Gallipoli. It was Gallipoli where the legend began. The night of May 19, 1915, the Turkish forces launched a massive assault, trying to reclaim the trenches lost days earlier. Under cover of darkness and chaos, they overran part of the Australian line. Jacka's section was hit hard. His trench was taken. And in the thick of night, he found himself alone, facing a trench full of armed enemies. But Jacka didn't retreat. He didn't panic. What he did was pure, raw, unfiltered audacity. Armed with a rifle and a few grenades, Jacka launched a one-man assault on the trench. He lobbed grenades into the line, then jumped in with his bayonet, fighting hand-to-hand in a confined corridor of death. By the time he was done, 7 Turkish soldiers were dead, and the trench was his again. One man, one trench. One impossible victory. For this, he was awarded the Victoria Cross, the first Australian to receive it in World War I. And when asked about it afterward, his response wasn't a boast. He simply said, "I managed to get the trench back." That was Jacka. The kind of man who shrugged off greatness like it was just another job well done. But Gallipoli was only the beginning. In 1916, Jacka and his battalion were sent to the Western Front in France. What awaited them was a nightmare unlike anything Gallipoli had offered. The Battle of Pozières would become one of the bloodiest chapters in Australia's military history. It was here that Jacka's legend transformed from a footnote in a military dispatch to a tale soldiers whispered around fires. The Germans launched a sudden assault on his position. The front collapsed. Jacka and a handful of men were buried in rubble when a shell hit nearby. Dazed but alive, he clawed out of the wreckage to find the enemy swarming over their trenches. Most soldiers would have laid low. Jacka didn't even flinch. He grabbed a rifle, rallied a few other dazed survivors, and together, they counterattacked against dozens of German stormtroopers. What followed was a scene that could have been pulled straight out of a war film. Jacka charging through smoke, bullets whipping past his head, clubbing, shooting, stabbing, dragging wounded men out of the muck as he fought tooth and nail. By the end of the melee, Jacka and his tiny crew had killed or captured over 50 Germans and retaken the position. He was wounded 7 times during the action. That day, he didn't just survive. He became a myth. Even the British soldiers fighting alongside him said it was the most heroic thing they'd ever witnessed. Many believed he should have received a second Victoria Cross for it. Instead, he was awarded the Military Cross. But to the men in the trenches, he didn't need a medal. He was already the yardstick for bravery. They started calling him the Sergeant York of Australia, though some said it should have been the other way around. And Jacka didn't stop there. Later that year, during the Battle of Bulcourt, Jacka's battalion was under heavy fire. A group of Australian soldiers had been cut off behind enemy lines. Command believed them lost. But Jacka, now a lieutenant, thought differently. He volunteered to lead a rescue. Crawling through no man's land under machine gun fire, He reached the isolated group and led them back through a hail of bullets, bringing wounded soldiers slung over his shoulders. Again and again, Jacka put himself in the line of fire, not out of a death wish, but because he refused to let others die alone. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He just couldn't stand the thought of leaving someone behind. In 1917, at Messines, Jacka was hit again. Shot in the chest. The bullet missed his heart by inches. Most men would have gone home. Jacka stayed. That same year, he took a machine gun nest with a bayonet charge, just him and one other soldier. In 1918, the war would take a toll that even Jacka couldn't ignore. Poison gas weakened his lungs. His body, riddled with wounds, began to falter. And still, he kept fighting. He survived shrapnel, bullets, hand-to-hand combat, and gas attacks. But the real weight he carried was the men he couldn't save. Friends buried in foreign soil. Names carved into wooden crosses. He bore them like scars on his soul. When the war finally ended, Jacka came home a national icon. But he didn't bask in the glory. He went back to work. He started a business. He became mayor of St. Kilda in Victoria. He helped veterans find jobs and rebuild their lives. He spoke rarely of what he did, and even less of what he saw. Albert Jacka died young, at just 39 years old, in 1932. His body was worn, but his legacy was ironclad. At his funeral, thousands came. Veterans, generals, civilians. The Prime Minister. They lined the streets to say goodbye to the man who had faced hell and fought it back with nothing but grit. Today, his name lives on in streets, memorials, schools, and statues across Australia. But more than that, it lives on in the stories. The ones passed down, whispered in classrooms and around campfires. Stories of a man who wouldn't give up an inch, not for kings, not for country, but for the brothers standing beside him in the mud. Albert Jacka didn't win a war. But he showed us how to fight when the world crumbles around you. He proved that courage isn't about the absence of fear, it's about refusing to let fear win. He showed us that even in the darkest moments, one person can light a fire the world never forgets. Thanks for watching Lore of the Multiverse. If you enjoyed this story of unrelenting bravery, give us a like, drop a comment below about which war hero we should cover next, and don't forget to subscribe. We'll be back soon with more stories that defy logic, death, and time itself. Until then, stay brave, stay curious, and stay legendary.